Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Battlefleet Gothic. So I had a request to do a tutorial video, and since I am taking requests on the series still, haven't really gotten that many, but we'll see if we can continue on. He wanted to know how to make a Blood Axe Clan Orc group, so we're going to start this from the very scratch here, because why the hell not? This is one of those particular fleets for the Orcs that actually does require a little bit of pre-planning, and that's because of the way that their mechanics work. So one of the most important things you're going to want to consider is that you will lose your front weapon in the majority of games that you play. So because of that, it might be important for you to take a side slot weapon, but you could also consider that the Mega Cannon is strictly speaking a bit of a downgrade according to the game. It's 5 points cheaper. You could use this to just save a little bit of points, rely on the Nova Cannon, and then just have your Mega Cannon if you're lucky to advance into the enemy for a short period of time. And this gun, having like 12 damage per second or something like that is absolutely crazy, so I mean, it is definitely something that you could consider taking if you really want to think about it in that sort of sense there. On the other hand, what I typically do for these guys at the start is focus mostly on the lots of heavy cannons. Now, when they say lots of, they only mean 2, but this does give this gun, this ship here, a little bit of tooth to it. It gives it a little bit of a consistent hitting power and damage from those sorts of weapons. And since you'll be able to broadside from both sides, even if you lose one of your weapon slots, you'll still be able to deal a little bit of damage. By contrast, if I'm relying on the lots of guns, these things are so terrible that you're probably not going to be able to even chip away at something if you get into broadside range. Now, you could always just use these guys as glorified battering rams at that point, but honestly, I much prefer taking the lots of heavy guns. Now, the last option, of course, is to take the ship with the carrier slots, the Grot ship's launchers. Now, this does make them significantly more expensive, and when you're taking Orc fleets that are relying on having Nova Cannon spam, which is sort of how this fleet functions, you don't necessarily want to have very expensive ships, but these guys are still probably a necessity in the sort of fleet composition at some point in time. Now, you could instead take these in the second tier of ship, though, and you can save a little bit. But if you're finding yourself up against current meta Eldar or the Chaos ships, then the Grot ship launcher could be useful on one of our early light cruisers. Now, Orcs, as ever, are weak in the early game. When you've got low-level ships, they do struggle a little bit against most compositions because they're very upgrade and skills dependent. But let's go ahead and add in a couple of these ships here. We'll diversify a little bit, but get 2 of these basic ships, then a single one with the launchers. Now, community is unfortunately a little bit dead, so it might be a little bit hard for me to get games there. Either way, let's think about what we're going to be doing here. Now, we have got, at this stage, Ordnance, and Orc Ordnance is quite good, actually, because they're able to fling out quite a few torpedoes for fairly cheap, and that's ultimately what's a little bit more important. This is the right kind of ship, right? Yes, it is. Okay, so what we want, well, it's going to vary from time to time, but we need strange things for Orc ships. We don't need Grot on a Rock or Grot Rocket Nosy. Neither of those are actually necessary because we don't need vision of our opponent to launch missiles or to use the Nova Cannon against them. So none of our effects really require that with this particular fleet, whereas if we were planning on going for the Bad Moon guys, the Bad Moon clan here, we would actually want those because we want to gain access to the Shock Attack Mega Cannon, and you even want a little bit of that for the Evil Sunz clan because you need a bit of vision to get the Tractor Cannon online. So this is an exception to the general rule of vision. You don't need any at all with this particular fleet composition. So what do we want on these types of ships? Well, typically speaking, you might want something that gives you extra maneuver. Something like Grot Assistance is actually quite reliably good on Orc ships, despite the fact that it's usually pretty terrible. The other option, of course, is something like Defense. You could take, for example, Overload Shields, which will allow your ships to survive for a lot longer in combat, and you could also take something like the Mech Boy Capacitors, although I prefer the Overload. You could also theoretically take something like the Stasis Bomb to lock people in place and then spam Novas onto their position. I typically find that's not too important. Rally could be an option for Orc ships, although I tend not to take that either. Wah is a little bit less necessary for this fleet type because you're probably not going to be able to use it effectively since your opponent's going to try and keep at range against you, although you're trying to keep at range at them, sorry, although typically speaking, if they're trying to get out of your Nova Cannon and torpedo spam, then they will close with you, at which point Wah could be quite handy. But strictly speaking, I do think that something like Defense could be the best option. Now, the other option is to take Disruption Bombs. We're going to go ahead and take one of them on one of our ships here. And then we're going to go ahead and grab up the Impenetrable Shields on the other one over here, and on this last one over here, the one that has the carrier capacity, I'm going to go ahead and take impenetrable shields as well. So this is going to give some survivability to our ships, but this also gives us the option to do a Disruption Nova combo. The way this works is you drop down the Disruption Bomb on a ship that you suspect might have access to impenetrable shields or the shield overcharge or anything like that. And that is going to allow you to then spam Nova Cannon shots on that ship. And since its shields are guaranteed to be down if you hit it, land the Disruption Bomb, you can cause humongous damage to a ship that would normally be able to tank through multiple Nova Cannon shots. And it's just all around a useful tool for the Orks because they have a little bit of trouble chipping their way through shields in the early game here. So this fleet composition is one that can work quite well, but we're not going to be able to do necessarily too well with it. We're still going to probably rely a little bit on the Savage gunship here, which is a great early game ship for the Orks. It's humongous damage for an escort there. Fairly tough at its particular angle of fire, and it's pretty good against the ships that you typically see in the early stages of the game. Things like, for example, the Tau I find are a pretty popular faction still, but you will suffer if you're up against someone like Space Marines, so in that particular case you're probably just going to take bashes. So anyway, let's see if we can perhaps level this fleet up a little bit, and I'll tell you a little bit about the advancement process, but if I can't level it up a little bit, then we'll go ahead and skip things. But if at this point in time you're wondering how to use this fleet, it does function in a way very, very similar to my previous Ork video, our introduction to Orks, and so on and so forth. So we're going to ignore that element to this and just talk a little bit about progressing the fleet. Okay, so we've managed to get ourselves our first level up. So let's go ahead and start talking a little bit about what we want to do when we're upgrading these types of ships here. So normally when you're playing as Orks, you kind of want skills that allow you to do something a little bit unique or interesting, but you also want some of the basics there. You want things like, for example, the Grot Messengers for the lock-on target brace for impact reload, stuff like that. You do want access to the Weird Boy Towers because it's extra damage in a way that you can't normally get for other factions. You do sometimes want the fire safety grots because you take double damage. This sort of mitigates that a little bit. You potentially want something like the generators to get to a tougher ship and so on and so forth. It depends on the type of design of ship that you're going for and how you want to play the game. But things are a little bit different in a certain sort of sense if you're playing as the particular faction, if you're playing as the Blood Axes. Now, you're going to need to get belt armor, and the problem with this is that you need to figure out when you want to sort of weave this into your build because it won't be useful for the first little while. So we can figure out what we're going to get until then. You want to actively avoid the Weird Boy Tower because it will explode when you're using the Nova Cannons, so let's not worry about that. Now, we can use something like the extra shields. We're not using Suicide Ram ships, so Bonkers Big Mech isn't really that important for us. But I do think that the extra shields could be a fairly good option for something like these Ork ships in the early game. So this is just going to make us so that we can fight more conventionally and effectively in the early game and not have to worry about getting the crap kicked out of us too badly. For this sort of, for what we want in this sort of section here, typically speaking you still want things like grots, but honestly speaking you don't need grots as badly when you're going for this type of build. So you can, if you want to do it, go ahead and grab the Daka Master because that's going to make it so that your heavy guns are going to be much more effective in that sort of regard. And I do think that that is something that you're going to want. Now, for me, I do think the grots are still a little bit better, but it really is up to you. You don't need the boys, especially this early into the game, because realistically, who's going to try and board the Orks? The suicidal people, basically. And it's not going to help much if they manage to successfully do it anyhow, because you'll probably repel it even without the boys. So let's go ahead and get a level of grots in this ship and a level of grots in this ship. So we did get a level on both of our ships there. We managed to survive a battle, kill one ship, and not take any deaths ourselves. Now we can sort of consider what we're going to be taking for our first of these abilities here. The Grot Messengers is still a good order, but it's not as important for Blood Axes because you potentially are going to be actually using your stealth ability. And this is quite contrary to what most Orks do. The reason that you might want to do this is if you find yourself in a situation against a long-range fleet who's using those long-range probes to figure out where your ships are, this is the only Ork fleet that can use their sort of orders to use that evasion and stop those people from detecting you. And so Grot Messengers isn't going to be necessarily as vital for these guys because they probably won't get to use it as often. Now, it is still good, and you'll still probably want to use Lock-On Brace for Impact or Reload more often than you want to use those other skills, the stealth skill. But because of this, I do think that it's a little bit better for us to take extra shields at this point in the game. The other option would be another bridge, but that's not necessarily too important. The reason that another bridge obviously is a good idea is because we want to be able to use that sort of special order even if our bridge gets destroyed. So we're not going to worry too much about criticals or stuff like that in the early game though. We're just going to go ahead and grab an extra shield there. And this is very, very standard stuff here. This is just making our ships a little bit tougher, make it so that they can get into melee combat a little bit more effectively and allow us to fight whatever it is we're fighting without having to worry too much about the consequences of those sorts of fights. Lets our ship survive it. And that's really all there is to it. Once we sort of get further along, we'll start seeing more differentiation. But we have to remember that this favor here does cost quite a lot of cost, a lot of influence or whatever this is. So, renown, sorry. So we do have to save up quite a bit. It won't be coming in fast, it'll be much, much later on in the game. But we are going to want to continue on getting these sort of skills and upgrades, because this is our mainstay ship, the Bashas here. And the reason is that each Basha gets a full-size Nova Cannon. There's no difference between a Nova Cannon on a Basha as compared to their large capital ship there. So ultimately, that's what we're going to be going for there. The next step to this is going to be just focusing on leveling up our ships as we progress, and we'll probably go ahead and get belt armor as our next upgrade. And after we've gotten belt armor, we'll probably get the fire safety grots, and then after that we can sort of differentiate what we want. Now this is the only Ork fleet that I don't think needs the turbo booster or the lots of thrusters. In fact, the turbo booster is really bad for these guys because they need the belt armor for their Nova Cannon. They can't really afford to use the turbo booster to use the boosts to get that extra speed. Like, this is an amazing one for the red sunz if you've also got belt armor, but that's not really what we're going for here. So I also don't think that you really need lots of thrusters for these guys. I don't think that you need any of these sort of mobility skills that you would normally have on other types of ships. You really just are focused on making it so that the opponent has as miserable a time as possible while they're at long range. And when you're sort of doing that, you know, you kind of want things like fire safety grots to make that a little bit better. You want things like another bridge. You want things like belt armor and stuff like that, just to make it so that they can't sort of use boarding actions to cripple your ships from long range with assault boats. And of course, it is to make your ships more durable at those long ranges against lances. And if they decide to close, you have to be able to fight them as well. So that's really what we're aiming for here. So anyway, let's skip forward a couple battles and see where we are once perhaps we start getting our Blood Axe ships. Okay, so we're back. This is probably going to be the last one, and this is the first major crossroads that you're going to encounter. So we've gotten to level 2. I've won a couple of games here, so we've leveled up all our ships a little bit here. But we've got access to this unlocked slot here, which is going to cost us 200, which coincidentally is enough for us to get access to the Blood Axes clan. Now, as I mentioned, the Blood Axes are reliant on the Basha. They don't really need these cruisers. You'll of course get them later once you've got a lot more renown and you're sort of not worried about that anymore. But at the same time, I can't really use the Blood Axes clan here that effectively either. The reason is that a single Blood Axes clan ship just isn't really that useful on its own. You kind of need to be able to multiply the effects of that by having multiple hits, because otherwise you're just going to strip their shields and then you slowly approach and by then they've got their shields back. It doesn't really make a huge difference. But if you've got lots of Nova Cannons, you can destroy an enemy ship before it can really do anything to counteract this. So ultimately at this point in time, since we do have to play a little bit more conventionally, this is where we spend our 200 on unlocking this ship here. Now this ship, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to lose your prow weapon. That's just a thing that's going to happen. We're going to go ahead and assume that this will become another ship that falls into the category of having the Blood Axes. So what we can do at this point in time is actually make this have a single one of those and a single one of these. I think that this combination is actually fairly strong for the Orks. It means I can start phasing out this level 2 Basha that has the squadrons, but sometimes, you know, you need a little bit more carrier, so it's okay to have this guy loitering around. But other than that, you do want to have just the sort of basic weapons so that you can rely on the ship to do its damage from the side there and in whichever other way as possible. Now this is not exactly the best broadside weapon in the game, but we will get a couple more of these and we will be able to sort of tack on other variants of this. For example, our next ship in this line is probably just going to have 2 lots of heavy cannons. That'll give it pretty decent damage from that side, and we'll probably be able to do that just fine. Now, the other thing to consider, I don't have enough levels to gain access to belt armor at this point in time, since we decided to get the extra shields instead. So I wouldn't have enough renown to get both the extra shields, or sorry, the belt armor and the favor anyway. So realistically, we can't really do much to benefit from that just yet. So we're going to wait until we've got quite a lot more renown, and then we're going to sort of all gain all of that kind of more or less at once here. So let's go ahead and add the ship in. Now it's going to be a little bit janky because this thing doesn't have any skills, but that's perfectly fine. It is still a pretty tough beastie boy there regardless, but again, we're probably going to go for a similar sort of idea for this one. And in this particular case, we can go Overload Shields and the Disruption Bomb. Eventually, we'll replace the Disruption Bomb on our light cruiser with Overload Shields, just to make that sort of whole thing click. Alright, and we're back. So we're finally at that stage where I've got both an upgrade and I've got enough renown to get that upgrade and then properly utilize it. So let's go ahead and grab up the belt armor, and you can see sort of how we're progressing our fleet as well. We grabbed a Terror. I'm going to be respecking this, so I didn't actually add in any particular modules or anything like that to the thing, and I'm going to be respecking it to make it a carrier. I feel like that's just going to be a little bit more efficient in this case. But let's go ahead and finally add in our first favor. Now, this doesn't suddenly make us a Blood Axe's Ork fleet, because realistically, the spam is what makes this important. I don't really have much benefit from being able to chuck out a single shot from a Nova Cannon. What really helps is if I'm able to throw out like 5 of these in a single crippling volley, especially paired with something like a Disruption Bomb. Okay, if you're going to be able to chuck one of these onto an enemy team and then capitalize on that by just throwing down a carpet of fire onto that ship, it's pretty much dead. But realistically speaking, yeah, this is not necessarily going to do a humongous amount of good for us right now. It's a single Nova Cannon. Yes, a single Nova Cannon is quite good. Means that we could fight against Eldar a little bit more effectively. In particular, we could also deplete shields without having to rely on something like our Disruption Bomb here a little bit, which does make these stacking just a little bit worse, but that's probably okay. And it gives us a little bit more flexibility at long range, but ultimately it will destroy our torpedoes, which is one of the better weapons in the game. Primarily the ordinaries, since we can only deal temporary criticals. Honestly, the boarding torpedoes are still pretty okay, but you know, troop value in this game, and the fact that you're only going to hit with like 4 of these is just what makes them kind of a little bit underwhelming. So anyway, this is the road that you're going to go down, and I am pretty much done leveling the ship for the time being. So what I'll probably try to level is our level 3 Terror, keeping in mind that our levels carry over when we replace the ship here. So I could safely go ahead and do something like, say... I hope this still works, otherwise I'm going to look awfully stupid. I could go ahead and do something like, say, this, and that would change it to this. There we go. Yeah, 159 points, and it's a little bit more expensive there. Now, I don't actually want this right now, since we don't have the ability to actually level this properly. So sticking with the gunship type, which is a little bit better when you don't have upgrades, and then sort of changing it to carrier later, that could be very good, although our carrier currently is dead, so... maybe we change this for the carrier type right now? I don't know. It would be kind of a cheap and interesting way to do that, but we'll stay with this for now. So focus primarily on your bashes at this point in time. I could potentially even grab another one, but honestly it's not too necessary for us to get another one of those right yet. We just sort of level up our ships until we can get access to a level 2 or level 4 on Gorkskilla. That'll get us that second one, which will let us get belt armor. Now, what does belt armor do? It means that the first permanent critical damage inflicted to a system of any sort is ignored. And what's nice about this is that this does also negate the critical hit caused to your ship by the Nova Cannon. So there's a 25% chance that you're going to cause a critical to yourself with this weapon. And that's an extremely, extremely bad thing to have happen to you. You really, really don't want to have the Nova Cannon exploding in your face there. So what's lovely about this is that you will be able to fire the Nova Cannon, suffer that critical once. It basically doubles the amount of fire that you can get out of your Nova Cannon fleet. Extremely powerful effect, and even if a ship doesn't end up needing to use that for that purpose, it does help you negate critical hits. Now, fortunately, it also isn't wasted on the temporaries, so you can sort of sit there and wait on your repair modules and wait until you've suffered a bunch of temporary criticals, go in and sort of deal some damage after that. But ultimately, it's just the best sort of upgrade for the ship. Now, I could talk a little bit about further upgrades in the future. For a lot of factions, I actually like getting the Weird Boy Tower, but I wouldn't actually do that with this particular fleet. We've got enough long-range firepower, and the Zap deck, as far as I've ever tested, like, it always seems to explode whenever my Nova Cannon explodes. What I tend to like getting is something like the Fire Safety Grots. Makes the fires last 50%, they're 50% shorter, which means that we take normal amounts of damage instead of doubled damage from that. And we also have probably something like another bridge, which will let us use our special orders like stealth, even if our bridge is destroyed. So we're basically really focusing and doubling down on our ability to negate crits. You could actually do this a little bit different. You could go full YOLO Kamikaze build, in which case you would ditch the shield upgrade, you would get the belt armor still, you would just chuck down ordnance at the enemy for as long as possible before you went in with the turbo booster, the lots of thrusters, and your bonkers big mech, because once your ship doesn't have any front weapon, it's pretty useless. So you can kind of just use your turbo booster to get in there into the middle of their ships and then explode if you manage to time things right. Personally, I don't play this style because I'm not very good at getting my ships to explode on demand, because there's no real way to do that. And usually by the time an Orc ship is about to explode, it's on fire, it's moving slowly, and it doesn't have a lot of boost left in it. So it could be an interesting way to do that. If I was going to go that route, I would probably take something like Grot Assistance or the Micro Warp Jump as my secondary. But yeah, that can be a funny troll build. Now, I could go for something that's a little bit more conventional looking, in which case I would take still the belt armor. That's still really, really important when you're taking this type of ship, always, always, always. But I would get something perhaps like Grot Messengers, which would let me use these standard abilities there. And what I would do is I'd use belt armor, but as soon as my belt armor procced, I would stop using my Nova Cannon on that particular ship. If I was paying enough attention, that would potentially work in there. And then I'd potentially use something like the Weird Boy Tower, which means I wouldn't lose it if I did suffer a critical. Take some of these extra shields or something like that, or perhaps take the lots of thrusters. And that combination would let me sort of be in melee combat a little bit more effectively and a little bit longer, and it would also open up a little bit more options for my front turret type, so I could opt to go for a little bit more of a Zap Cannon focused build if I wanted to with my higher tier ships, or it would also let me use the Mega Big Cannon, whatever the hell it's called. So those are sort of your options with this particular fleet. I think that the one that I'm going for here, where you sort of work on becoming the best short-range brawler out there and use your long-range ordnance and your Nova Cannon to compel your opponent to come into close range to avoid those Nova Cannon blasts, is the best way to play these guys. But obviously other people are going to have different play styles, and you want to cater to that as best as you can. But those are the types of styles that I find work best for this. So anyway, let's maybe get into a match, and I'll show you sort of what an early-ish match with the Orcs looks like, especially as you're sort of progressing towards getting a Blood Axe clan. Because, honestly, this bonus is trash when you only have a little bit of it. It gets exponentially better the more of it that you have, up until we get to later points. Now, just as a point that I could add now, once we start getting into the higher tiers of ships, we actually only want to get cruisers and light cruisers. We don't want to bother getting a battle cruiser or our battleship. The reason is that both of those cost tons of renown. Upgrading them costs tons of renown. Skilling them up costs tons of renown. What we want to do is focus that renown on getting favors and skills for our lighter ships, and we're just going to focus every single point that we get into that sort of element there. Now, I probably should actually unlock this, but until we get access to it's hard to tell how much you're going to get before you get there. Sometimes you end up against a lot of fleets where they all just run away. Sometimes you end up in a lot of losing streaks, whatever. So, in any event, let's wait until we get a match, and we'll take a look at the fleet in action. Alright, so we find ourselves in this particular match up against the Tau. So let's go ahead and see how things go. We got a pair of Bashas and we got a pair of Savages. That's going to be our fleet for now. And this is going to be fairly straightforward. We just want to move into close range for him and sort of swarm around his ships with the Savages to get around the flanks and so on and so forth, while making it unpleasant to look at our front line there. So the main thing about the ship, the Nova Cannon, isn't really going to be super useful at this point in time. If I'm up against a higher level fleet, and I am myself using a higher level fleet, this can be really devastating against the Tau, because they tend not to have as many ships that have the ability to instantly negate the entire Nova Cannon barrage. They are more likely to have the repair modules, in my opinion. And on the other hand, my opponent has taken, apparently, several escorts, so he might have taken some ships that just are probably not a great idea, but we'll figure out what that all is once we get up there. So, going to go ahead and go boarding action. They sort of have to go boarding action as well, so... I'm going to kind of want to wait until he moves around this little object here before I fire off my torpedoes, but once we do that, we'll be able to get off a couple of volleys of these probably. And of course the savages, I should probably also customize the orders for. We've got a few seconds here, so let's go ahead and change these guys up here. They are forward firing, but I would rather these guys use the lock-on order. So, essentially what we do with this particular fleet, pretty much the standard orc things, but what we can do with this that's a little bit interesting is keep our ships away a little bit. We don't have to worry or focus on closing in as fast as possible, which normally is sort of the case with a lot of orcs. Now, there is the other style of orc, which is the kind that I don't advocate, and that is you just sit in the corner and you launch as many torpedoes at the enemy as possible. Now, while I can appreciate launching torpedoes at approach, I really have no respect for orc players that just fling torpedoes from across the map. It reeks of cowardice. So anyway, let's go ahead and see what sort of ships they've got there. We can guess that they've got one carrier, and therefore they've got two of the escorts that follow along with that. What we sort of should also assume from this is that they've brought along two of the basic escorts. So let's go ahead and try and land ourselves a Nova Cannon shot. Now this is sort of roughly near a lot of their stuff, so I don't think we're going to get an instant kill off that. Oh, we did. Okay, nice. So it must have been one of the really light ships there. And we got a turn 1 belt armor destroyed. Fantastic. And this is why this weapon is trash, but it is enough to kill an escort in a single hit, so, you know, whatever. It must have been one of their lighter ones. Actually, no, a messenger's also got 100 hit points. Well, either way. Let's go ahead and start launching out some more stuff there, see what happens. Managed to land another hit there with a torpedo, so that's good. And we'll see what we can do here. Chuck that down. His carrier, intelligently enough, is further to the back, which is a good idea. Messenger up front, and he's going to be killing my escort pretty quickly here, it looks like. We're just going to go straight for his larger carrier ship here. We're not going to give a crap about his lighter ship there. Now, we have launched off our torpedoes, so we could potentially not care as much about some elements of our Nova Cannon, but let's go ahead and boost our way forward towards this guy. Alright, and we want to sort of negate his mobility here. He's pulling a runner. Alright. So, kiting against the orcs, pretty good way of dealing with them to a certain extent. But it does mean that we can sort of chuck torpedoes at him, so let's not worry about this thing right now.
Here we go.
Alright, so he's going to probably get away, which is a bit of a shame, but we could potentially...
Can we go faster?
Yeah, he's going to get away. Bit of a damn shame there, but you know what, that's fine. Alright, well, to finish off, let's use the Nova Cannon if we can. I mean, why not? One of the things it does do is that it is something that deals twice as much damage against these little escorts here. So we can actually kill them off a lot more easily than you would expect, thanks to it. That's a big miss. I was leading the shot so I wouldn't destroy automatically all of my own ships there, but...
What you want?
Alright. Looks like I managed to do that without destroying my own ship at the very least, but there we go. Got our hits in. So, pretty normal stuff for orcs. Now, it did prove advantageous here because we sniped off one of his lighter ships right off the bat, but honestly, the Tau escorts are kind of weak unless you've got the high-level Nikasar Dows. So, until you've got access to those with the turret upgrades, you're probably not going to be worried about them regardless, so I didn't really care. In any event, we've managed to get ourselves 233 more renown. I just want to keep winning like this. We got ourselves another Basha up to level 3. I mean, I could even consider grabbing the upgrade again for this, but again, we want to avoid that until a little bit later. So yeah, Orc fleets still work quite well up at this stage of the game at just being pretty much standard Orcs. They're going to be a little bit weaker because you're sort of not using your terror properly. Normally for any other clan, I would fully be advocating leveling up your terror, but we need these bashes up to level 4. That's sort of what we're going with here. So anyway, that's a look at how to create a Blood Axes fleet. You just continue doing what we're doing here. You can keep leveling this guy up as well, because we do still want him to become stronger. Once he's hit the level cap, then he's just going to be everything that you want it to be, a little bit stronger, a little bit better. But you want to make sure that you're using all of these other ships as often as possible as well, so it's going to be up to you whether or not you think you need this ship to act as sort of a crutch, or if you can get away with using a bunch of the other weaker ships. So anyway, that's how we build a Blood Axes fleet. Hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.